Merit and demerit goods is another example of market failure which occurs when there is a problem with information within the market. So let's think about the definitions of these two terms then. If we think about a merit good, first of all, a merit good is where a consumer, so it's important to remember that with merit and demerit goods, the information failure is on the part of the consumer. The consumer is unaware of the full benefits of the consumption of that good. And a demerit good, a very similar definition, again, it's about being unaware, but this time the full costs of consumption. So let's just think a little bit more about what those benefits and costs might be. Well, if we think about the costs, first of all, what costs might there be that the consumer is unaware of? Well, these fall into two categories, really. Some of them we have already thought about in a previous video. So if there are externalities, if we're talking about a demerit good, then we're talking about negative externalities. If there are externalities, then the consumer may well not be aware of what they are. The other thing that they may not be aware of are the costs actually to the consumers themselves, i.e. to the person that actually consumes the good. And it may well be the case that actually a good is more harmful to them than they fully appreciate. And obviously when we think about a merit good, we've got a similar sort of thing with the benefits here. We've got our positive externalities, which will also have an effect here. And then we also have additional benefits to the consumer, which they don't fully take account of. So when we're thinking about why these information failures exist, we need to think about it both in terms of the externalities that they might not be considering and the costs or benefits to themselves that they might not be aware of. What are the implications of these things then? Well, we're going to talk about this in a little bit more detail in due course, but if a consumer is not aware of the full benefits that occur as a result of their consumption, then their demand won't be as high as it should be because they're not considering these benefits properly. And as a result of that, we can say that a merit good will be under-consumed. So a merit good will lead to a market failure of underconsumption. A demerit good will then obviously lead to overconsumption, and in this case it's because of the fact that there are costs which this individual is not taking account of, and as a result of that they will probably consume too much of them. So that's all a bit kind of theoretical at the moment, so let's actually give a couple of examples and see if that helps to clarify things a little bit. So if we just move all of this up to the top here. So two examples we're going to look at, fairly kind of classic economic ones really to consider, are vegetables and alcohol. So, I mean, it should be fairly obvious to start with that the vegetables we are going to be looking at as a merit good, and the alcohol in this case is the demerit good. But let's just think a little bit more about what these costs and benefits are and why it is that these goods are merit and demerit. So what we need to think about, remember, when we consider these are the additional costs or benefits to the consumer, which they don't take account of, and the costs and benefits to those people outside of the transaction, the externalities, which again the consumer is probably not going to consider. So I'm not going to go through and make a completely exhaustive list here, but basically what we need to do is we need to think about, firstly, the external costs and benefits, the externalities, and we also need to think about the information failure essentially in terms of the benefit which goes to the consumer. So if we think about the external benefits of vegetables that people probably don't consider, I suppose what we are kind of thinking about here in terms of external benefits is that a healthier lifestyle, I suppose we could say, benefits in the UK at least the NHS, and therefore reduces expenses on the NHS, and that obviously will then be an external benefit because that will give the government more money to spend on other things or potentially reduce people's tax bills. So it will benefit people beyond those who just consume the vegetables. On the other side then, the alcohol. Now I'm sure you've looked at alcohol as a negative externality good anyway, but you could look at this in terms of the impact on the crime and the policing, on the noise, Again, in terms of the negative impact on health would be a major one as well. So those are all external costs. Those are costs which are felt, at least with the health one, at least if we think about it in terms of the NHS, those are costs which are felt by the non-consumer of alcohol. So with the vegetables then, what are the private benefits which are not fully considered? I suppose what we could say here is that people underestimate the benefits of vegetable consumption. They don't consume enough. They are aware that again there's the guidance that they ought to eat 5 portions a day, fruit and veg. But a lot of people, I suspect, probably don't understand why. They would know it's something to do with vitamins, but that would be about it. So the private benefits is that people don't consider are the full extent. So I suppose what we could add in here as well, just to make this a little bit more emphatic, is that they are aware that these things are beneficial, but they don't consider necessarily the full benefit that they themselves receive. And again, the alcohol. What are the private costs there? Well, I suppose if you take it to an extreme, it's likely to be a shorter life expectancy. But I suppose if we focus on the more immediate, there's obviously the kind of the hangover, which a lot of people aren't probably considering as much as they should when they are consuming alcohol on a night out. But again, it's essentially the same sort of problem, which is that people underestimate the full, but obviously in this case, the problem is that they underestimate the full costs of their consumption. So in whatever way that happens, they will underestimate these things. Now, there are a few reasons why this might be the case. It may be that the information simply is not available to them. They simply don't know. It may well be that the information is available, but that they don't process it properly. It might be too complicated for them to understand, for instance. So it may prevent them actually understanding and taking full account of those things. It may well be that there's an element of human irrationality creeping in terms of the fact that we value costs and benefits very differently if they happen a long way in the future. So for all of these reasons, people may underestimate the full costs and benefits to themselves as a result of consumption. Now, the AS specification, or at least the EdXL one, does not require you to show these diagrammatically, but there are some relatively straightforward diagrams which you could use here to support your analysis. So I'm just going to show you those. But again, the little bit that we're about to go on and consider here is beyond the kind of the specific requirements of the course. So we're going to start by thinking about the merit good, which is the diagram on the left here, and I've just started off by drawing our standard starting point for market failure diagrams. Now, the problem that we've got here, essentially, with the merit good is a problem of perception down here, because people are not considering the benefits properly. Okay, so the issue is that this demand curve, which comes from the benefits that people perceive, actually is not in the right place. So what actually the situation is that the benefits of consumption of a merit good are actually higher than they ought to be. So what we end up with is a situation like this, where the higher of these two curves is the actual level of benefit which is being received, and the lower one is the level that people actually perceive. So what that means then, when we mark on our new equilibrium, is, as we would expect, that there is less of this good being consumed, which is the Q, so the actual level of consumption is less than the amount of consumption which would occur if these actual benefits were all being considered. So this at the bottom here, this is our under consumption that we referred to at the start. And similarly, the problem with the demerit good is that the level of benefit is higher than is actually being received, because there are these kind of these drawbacks as a result of consumption, which will actually reduce the amount of benefit which is being received. So a demerit good we would draw with an actual benefit curve that was below the perceived benefit curve. And again, when we mark on our equilibria here, as you would expect, we end up with a diagram which shows us that the actual level of consumption Q is higher than it ought to be, which is at Q1. So if all of the costs were being considered when the person was deciding whether they were going to buy that alcoholic drink, for instance, then they would consume less. So, I suppose as far as merit goods go, your other kind of examples that may well crop up in exams potentially are things like education is often viewed as a merit good. Exercise would be viewed as a merit good. Anything that's generally good for you, to be honest, would normally be considered a merit good. Demerit goods, again, generally kind of anything which is bad for you, really. So kind of alcohol, smoking, drugs, all of that sort of stuff. Some people would argue that kind of video games or something like that, you could make an argument about being a demerit good. So lots of examples on either side, but the important thing to remember about the merit and demerit goods is that it is all to do with a failure of perception. People do not perceive the costs and benefits of consumption properly, and as a result of that, they do not consume at the most appropriate level.